gals, guys, and everyone in between. So one of the major arguments that the far right are pushing against the transgender and non-binary community going through a medical transition of hormonal replacement therapy or getting surgeries. The following quote is what they are pushing. We are a lifelong consumer to Big Pharma. So we're going to break this down completely, honestly, with facts and statistics. We're going to do this. Now first we're going to go through a list of 6 different kinds of people who also need life-saving medication and are also lifelong consumers of Big Pharma. The first group of people that require lifelong treatment are people with diabetes. That's any kind of diabetes, type 1, type 2. It can also be contracted through gene mutations, contracted through a side effect through certain medications that affect the pancreas, and gestational through pregnancy, which sometimes does stick or come back later in life after the pregnancy. Now all these need lifelong medication of some sort of insulin, whether that's through insulin injections, through medication that stops or slows the blood pressure spikes, or medication that improves insulin sensitivity. Now the amount of people who have been diagnosed in the United States alone with diabetes of some form is right around 30 million. And more than 8 million of those people, of the 30 million, use some sort of insulin, which is lifelong treatment with doctor visits, needles, the whole gist. Now the second group of people has the same statistic of around 30 million in the United States alone. People who have high blood pressure can take an array of different kinds of medicines, including beta blockers to slow down the heart, diuretics to decrease the amount of salt and water in their blood. The blood vessels in people who have high blood pressure tend to make more of the salt and water than their body needs, and so that brings it down a bit. The amount of people who are diagnosed with high blood pressure in the United States alone is about half of all US adults. 60% of those people, 60% of the 50%. They need to consistently have doctor visits, medications prescribed to them. So if we can lowball the US adult population in half, from around 60 to 70 million, we can comfortably say that about 30 million people require high blood pressure medication and ongoing treatment for the rest of their lives. Now for the third kind of people who have severe arthritis, which affects the meeting of 2 different bones in the body. It is very common in adults over the age of 50, can be inflammatory, and it can get to the point where it is so severe that joints actually need to be replaced through surgery. Now there's over 100 different kinds of arthritis. A common form of medication is akin to acetaminophen, which is found in Tylenol. Cortisone shots are common as well, and if you get to the point of rheumatoid arthritis, which is severe pain, there's something called DMARDs, which is short for disease-modifying anti-rheumatoid drugs. Now the amount of people with specific diagnosed arthritis in the United States rides around 50 million. Most patients taking at least 2 medications to help with their arthritis, the medication for which is absolutely needed and life-saving. Moving on to number 4, the fourth group of people that require lifelong medication are people with a mental health disorder and diagnosis. And it is surprisingly something that actually goes untreated a lot of the time, whether they're not having insurance or being homeless. And mental health can be anything from bipolar to depression, anxiety, schizoaffective, different kinds of autism and ADHD. Those are all considered mental health disorders, and they all require lifelong medication, usually require therapy, as well as having a psychiatrist prescribe you medication that they believe will help you. It's a lifelong thing. While it is estimated that 1 in every 5 US adults has some sort of mental illness, only 6% of US adults have been officially diagnosed with some sort of mental disorder. Now that's 15 million people who are on at least 2 different medications for antipsychotics, antidepressants, stimulants. Another statistic counts at least 700,000 people, the whole world, not just the United States, that commit suicide every year. 700,000 people die by suicide every year and therefore die of depression or some sort of mental health disorder. And so moving on, we are going to move on to the 5th group of people who require lifelong medication. And those are people who have contracted AIDS and have caught it early on enough that they can medicate it and prolong their life. Some of the diseases that can be caught from HIV are the human papillomavirus, which is HPV, pelvic inflammatory disease, which is PID. There's syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and hepatitis B and C. Now this is a disease that has killed many of our LGBTQ forefathers and foremothers in the 80s and 90s. If it is not known that somebody has it before having a new sexual partner, it can be implanted into them as well. Now, the first case that they described as AIDS was in 1981. Now, in 1981, the President of the United States was Ronald Reagan. It took 6 years from 1981 to 1987 to create some sort of counter to the AIDS virus. Most of our government did not see a reason to create some sort of preventative or drug that would help deter it. And that was until it started killing the non-gay people, the non-trans people, people who were not in the LGBTQ movement. Because at the time they believed that HIV and AIDS affected only gay people, especially for the African American and colored community in the United States, which was used as a deter to prevent people of color from getting the medication. First medication came out that would slow down the spread of AIDS in 1987. And while it is impossible to gauge a number for the amount of people who have been on some sort of HIV treatment, it is very much likely that this number is also in the millions. So now we're going to move on to number 6, the sixth group of people that require lifelong medication, life-saving medication to live. That group of people includes anyone that has had an organ transplant since the year 1983. Now this can be anything from the heart, the lung, the pancreas, liver, intestines, even the eye cornea. Well, the first transplant was with a heart in the 1950s. At the time, they did not have a medication to do so, and so they were only able to successfully do organ transplants in twins and triplets and so on. Over the next few decades, they meddled with many different kinds of medications that they thought would counter it, and many did, in fact, fail. And then in 1983, about 30 years after the first heart transplant, they found a medicine that they called cyclosporin. Since then, they have created other medications that work as well, but they all have the same sort of ingredients that cyclosporin has. And around 75% of the people who have had an organ transplant in the past 42 years, 3 out of 4 people who have had an organ transplant since the 1980s have had this medication. Without this medication, your body treats this new organ as a foreign body and rejects it. Again, it is a needed and life-saving medication. Now let's move on to the next portion of this video. While many people who are transgender, and yes, we are not going to be saying identify as transgender because that signifies that it is a choice to be transgender. It's about information, positive role models, and having the terminology to go off of. I can't even put a number to the amount of people that I know that when they see the proper representation or have the proper definition of transgender, something just clicks in their brain and saying, they're writing about me, they're describing me. Then when they're looking back at their childhood, at their formative years, they realize that every sign was there. And that's whether you came out at 6 years old or 76 years old and beyond. Now, the other part of this argument states that people who are transgender do not need to be on hormones or get surgery in order to be transgender. In fact, only 55% of people who are transgender actually actively go on hormones. 55% of us. Now, only 25% of those 55% people who are transgender actually undergo surgery of any kind. Now let's look at the statistics of this fact, starting with the population of the world as of September 10th, 2025 at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. The current population, according to worldometers.info, is 8,245,760,098 people. So let's take that number, 8,245,760,098. If we divide that by 100, we'll find what 1% of the world population is. Or you can easily move the decimal point from the very end 2 points to the left. That 1% of the world's population who is transgender is around 82,457,601, and we times that by 0.55 to get 55% of that. Now that percentage comes down to 45,351,681. Now let's take the official 9% proved statistic from the 2022 Transgender Survey. So if we take 9% off of the original, that is 4,081,651 individuals who do transition. Our new number becomes 41,270,030 people. which is the mathematical statistic of people who are diagnosed with gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder, which is the old term. That's accounting for 1% of the world's population and 55% of that 1% who are medically transitioning, minus the 9% of detransitioners. Now let's adjust that number to the population of the United States. Now, currently, the United States is only 4.2% of the world's population. That seems very minuscule because China has 17.6% and India has 17.94% of the population. The rest of the world has the remaining 60.26% of the world's population. So let's find the number of people who are actively transitioning in the United States of America right now. We'll take 41,270,030 people, times it by 0.042, which is 4.2%. You move it 2 points to the left. If we divide the 1,733,341 people, if we divide it by the population of the United States, which has been indicated by the U.S. Census Bureau as of September 6, 2025, so 4 days ago, in or around 342,436,231 individuals. And by doing that, we get the percentage of 0.506179207421542. We can even round that up to 0.51 because the next number is a 6, a 1, and a 7. So now let's look back at the statistics for the 6 kinds of people who also depend on life-saving medication. 8 million people inside the United States have diabetes and are taking more than one medication for that. We get 21.67% of people who are transgender as compared to people who have diabetes. That is the same statistic for people who have high blood pressure, so 21.67%. 50 million people have arthritis, and divided by, we get 3.47%. There are 15 million people who take some sort of antidepressant, antipsychotic, or stimulant, and if we take that number, that becomes 11.56% of people. Now, for the 2 remaining groups of people, it is hard to figure out a number, but I'd say at least 10 million to 15 million for both of those combined is a pretty reasonable number, both of which have been around since the 1980s. So what you are saying by this is straight and clear. You are angry that 1,733,341 people are actively transitioning on hormonal care, who are lifelong consumers of big pharmaceutical companies. You support every single other kind of person who takes medication lifelong, who are also lifelong consumers to big pharmaceutical companies. People who have had anything from organ transplants to arthritis to high blood pressure, to people who have mental health disorders or have AIDS. You are mad that accredited doctors with the same qualifications, the same training, the same coursework from the same institutions who have gone through school all the way through doctorate levels are diagnosing and prescribing us medication which has been deemed medically sound, proved to drastically increase our quality of life, to work directly with the WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, who create medical guidelines up to date with science that monitors our blood hormone levels, making sure that we are in normal biological or cisgender levels of hormones. You're mad that we're using medically prescribed medication to take control of our own bodies, so they more fit our standards. You're angry that we are taking control of our own happiness and putting it into our own hands. That our outlook on life is drastically increasing. You are angry that you cannot control us as much as you once could, as we had been with our pre-transition selves. You're angry too that instead of having us buried 6 feet under with our dead name or old name written on the tombstone, you have to see us smiling, thriving, us having a greater quality of life, while we continue to push for our survival daily, while you continue to push us down. Striking down protections that we once had and are now being stripped away of. Denying us care, denying us prescribed hormonal medication. And so to end this video, I want to quote one of my friends, one of the best transgender singer-songwriters, Ryan Casada, who wrote the song The Truth, the Life, the Way. Passing hate laws to distract us from what's factual, divide us up like rivals. We fight for our survival while we smile. So, until next time, keep it casually authentic. Love, Andrea.